What's the most body-freezing confession you've heard that someone casually throws into the open? Story 1, I just got a new coworker, and in the first hour, he told me he got let go from a job for sharing a wild story. He said, I was fired from another gig for checking out some adult stuff and, well, handling my business in the office. Dude, this story has already cost you 2 jobs. Maybe just keep it to yourself. Story 2. So, it wasn't like a straight-up admission or anything, but a coworker shared this story about a lawsuit he was wrapped up in that sounded pretty wild. I figured I'd check it out online to see if I could dig up the court case. Instead, I stumbled upon an article where he ended up getting busted for filming kids. Story 3. I was chatting with a close buddy of my dad, who has sadly passed away. He mentioned that ages ago, he talked my dad out of doing something really bad to my mom. He thought she was being unfaithful, and even followed her to college with a gun in the car. But the reality is, she wasn't cheating at all, and they had kids together back then. I totally believe what he told me. It gives me chills just thinking about what my life would have been like if that went down. My mom is seriously the best person I know by far, and I'm super grateful she's still around. Story 4. I used to hustle selling cable. You wouldn't even believe some of the wild stuff that folks over 70 will spill to you. One time, I asked this older lady what streaming services she was into because I was trying to help her pick a good internet speed. She takes this deep breath and casually says, my dad used to sneak into mine and my sister's room at night. Mom told us to be good girls and keep our dirty laundry to ourselves. I was just sitting there, and all I could think to say was, so, Netflix? Hulu? Story 5. So, I'm in a wheelchair and got approached by this homeless lady in Vegas who was super upset about me trying to cross the street. She said she saw another person in a wheelchair get hit and sadly ended on that same road, and insisted that I should always have someone with me who can walk for safety reasons. She got pretty worked up, so I politely backed off, telling her I'd be careful. Honestly, it shook me up a bit. Later on, I looked up what she was talking about. You won't believe it, but her mugshot popped up in the search. Turns out, she was the driver. Story 6. Chilling with a buddy over a board game who had turned into a dealer. He mentioned this one night when someone totally scammed him, and he and his crew went after the guy, which ended up in a wild car chase. The other car ended up hitting an innocent person, and that person was left with some serious injuries. He felt super guilty about the whole thing and kept replaying news clips about it non-stop. A year later, I heard he passed away from alcohol poisoning. That took a turn real quick. Just your typical board game night, huh? I mean, nothing says fun times, like a car chase and a life-altering incident. Pretty wild that he was stuck in that guilt loop, though. It's like, dude, when you're not just dealing meds but also starring in your own crime flick, maybe it's time to rethink your life choices. And then he goes out from alcohol poisoning? Ugh, that's a tragedy all around. People really don't realize how fast life can spiral. It's a lot to unpack. And honestly, can we just keep the games to Monopoly or something less dramatic? Story 7. So, one of my really close friends had been MIA for like a year, just traveling around the country, hitchhiking, crashing on random couches, and even camping out in the desert. When he finally came back, we all got together to chill, and it basically turned into a mini party. At one point, he just casually mentions that he's got a court date coming up, and it turns out his ex is suing him because he seriously hurt his baby daughter before he took off. Then, he just tries to keep the vibe going like nothing happened. Honestly, I don't think I saw anyone who was there hanging out with him. Story 8. When I was locked up, they had to clear out a cell because a dude got shanked by his cellmate. I was in the cell right next door when the guard pulled those guys out, and they were joking about how the guy who passed away was crying and couldn't even speak English, saying they waited to open the doors until the attacker was done. I still think about that stuff when I'm trying to catch some Z's. Story 9. One of my closest friends from when I was about 15 casually brought up how tough it was to get some stuff out of her hair after hanging out with her dad. I was super curious and asked her more, and she said it happened more than once, and that her mom was aware. So, I went straight to my folks and they reached out to the right people. Story 10. You just jogged my memory. So, my partner and I were chatting with my grandma, and everything was pretty chill. Out of nowhere, the convo shifted to guns, and she just shook her head and said, "Oh no, I've despised guns ever since I found my friend who was attacked and ended in her garage. She was shot with her own piece." We just kind of sat there like, what are you supposed to say to that? Then, out of the blue, she switched gears and started talking about her puzzle. That took a hard left turn real quick. Like, 1 minute you're vibing with grandma, and then boom, she drops a horror story like it's just casual dinner convo. It's wild how people can just switch topics like that. Oh, don't mind my traumatic story. Let's go back to my 1000 piece puzzle. Props to her for being candid. But man, that would leave anyone at a loss for words. Just sitting there like, okay, so do you really like crosswords or gotta respect her resilience though? That's some next level grandmothering skills. Story 11. So I went on a first date with this dude, right? Like just 10 minutes in, he drops this bombshell saying he once accidentally took out a cat with his bare hands but can't really recall the whole thing. Story 12. My grandma was born in 1918 in Germany, and she made it through some serious bombings during World War II. Our family didn't really chat much about the tough stuff. When the war came up, it was usually just funny stories. I was about 9 when we were watching a documentary with my parents and grandma. It was all about the bombings, and when they mentioned the word firestorm, we kids got kinda curious. My parents started explaining how a huge fire can suck in so much air that it creates a strong wind that pushes the flames even farther. Out of nowhere, my grandma got this faraway look and casually said, "I've seen people burn like torches." We were like, "Wait, what?" And grandma snapped back to reality and said, "What?" I guess it was something she needed to get off her chest, but she didn't even realize she said it. Story 13. A girl from South Africa that I met back in college and I were chatting after a psych class about trauma. We got into how safe she felt in that college town when she casually mentioned that she'd been kidnapped and hurt by some gang members back home. I was seriously taken aback, but when I asked her to share more, she acted like it was just a normal part of life. She said nearly every woman she knew growing up had dealt with some form of violence in South Africa. She was the first person I'd met who talked about coercion so openly. It felt super validating since I'd been through something similar and hadn't shared it with anyone at that time. Story 14. So, my dad was sharing a story about one of his college pals who was super into nitrous oxide, like really into it. He actually wrapped a bag around his head and ended up suffocating. Dad was laughing while telling the story like it was all funny, but when I mentioned it might have been a self-deletion, his expression totally changed. It was like he never even considered that angle before. That's a real shift from casual college stories to a heavy one. The fact that your dad just tossed that out there like it's some random anecdote is wild. I mean, it's like, haha, remember that time someone died in a pretty dark way? Not exactly dinner table material. It's concerning how sometimes people joke about serious issues without realizing the weight behind them. Just goes to show that not every story needs a punchline, you know? So, yeah, pretty grim. Story 15. When the first Harry Potter flick dropped in 2001, my then-boyfriend turned to me while we were chilling in the theater and admitted he had a crush on Hermione, played by Emma Watson. She was only 10 and he was 25. I was totally shocked by how casually he talked about being a kid. Fast forward a few years, and we found out he had actually harmed a young girl from the family that took him in after his mom booted him out. He was 16, and she was under 10, I think. So, yeah, major red flags there. Story 16. A buddy of mine shared this wild story from when he was 7. He went to take a leak and kind of missed the mark a bit, you know? So, his dad made him lay down in front of the toilet, and, well, he peed on him to show him how to aim better. He said it all super chill, like it was no big deal. It's kind of messed up to think that this wasn't the only thing his dad taught him. And the fact that he talked about it like it was just a normal part of growing up is kind of heartbreaking. Story 17. So, at this sleepover when we were teens, my friend opened up about how the leader of her church was taking advantage of her whenever he could, and she was freaked out about possibly being pregnant. We had just been chatting about Take That versus Backstreet Boys, and we were only 13. She had written about this in an essay for school that week, and our teacher totally flipped out, but in a super supportive way. She made it clear that none of this was the girl's fault, called in her parents to help with the convo, basically to make sure they believed her and would back her up. Got the cops involved, and looped in social services to make sure she got the right help. After that, her parents drove home, and then E's dad went for a little stroll to their former family friend's place. I heard the cops showed up, but no one got arrested that night. Small-town Norway vibes. If you chill out now, I won't have to deal with paperwork. Don't make me come back. My stepdad mentioned seeing the preacher limping around on crutches, and my mom just said, "Good." There was a court case, and of course, a bunch of people from the church decided to blame the 13-year-old, saying she seduced the adult and was just a bad girl ruining a good man. The judge wasn't having it at all, and that so-called good man ended up in jail. But my friend never really bounced back. She fought hard, went through treatment for her eating issues and the self-harm habits she picked up from all the stress. And even now, as adults, you can tell she's carrying something heavy with her. I love you, E. None of that was your fault, girl. I'm really sorry that awful person stole so much from you. Story 18. So, I'm doing this job interview for an office clerk position, and I'm the one making the calls. I asked the candidate if he'd have any issues dealing with customers from different backgrounds, including folks who might have been in jail or used to be. He's like, nah, that's not a problem. But then he goes on to share that when he was a kid, he had some really messed up stuff happen with priests. And for the next 10 minutes, he dives into those details. My coworkers and I were totally taken aback. We were just trying to figure out if he could handle taking phone orders from people who might not have the best English. Story 19. So, I was at this club once hanging out with some work buddies. There was this one guy who had a really strict upbringing, and it was his first time actually hitting the drinks. He got all emotional and came out as pink, but I bet he didn't even remember it the next day. I still check out his social media, and it looks like he's still hiding in the closet. This is a classic case of liquid courage in action. It's like, congrats on the mini coming out party, but also sad when you forget the most pivotal moment of your life by morning. I mean, at least he found a safe space in a club, right? But now, he's just living that, I swear I'm straight, I promise, life on Instagram. Gotta love when the club vibes hit differently for some of us. Hope this dude finds his way out of the closet someday. Maybe with a little less liquid assistance next time. Story 20. So, I had this coworker, during karaoke night, right? Just casually mentioned that she loved hanging out with dogs and was on the hunt for a donkey. Like, cool girl, but my song is coming up next. Story 21. So, a few years back on my birthday, my mom picked me up so we could grab some food, and out of nowhere, she started talking about this trip we took to Disney for a cheer competition. The only thing I really wanted on that whole trip, aside from grub, was this round Minnie Mouse plushie filled with those squishy foam beads. It was super soft, so I went up to my mom and asked if I could get it. She said no, so I just figured that's what parents do. They don't want you to have cool stuff. Then, she casually mentions why I actually ended up with it on the last day of the trip. At that time, my bio dad and my mom were still together, and he totally wiped out their joint bank account on some wild night at a local strip club. Crazy, right? One of my mom's friends who was with us, and whose daughter was also on the team, had to cover our dinner that night, and I had no clue. The next morning, she had to call her job to ask for a 3-day advance on her paycheck, since we weren't leaving until Saturday morning, which meant we were looking at like 3.5 days without food, because our stay only covered breakfast at the resort. By then, I already couldn't stand my bio dad, and I couldn't believe he'd be so reckless. I always thought he was irresponsible, but I never thought he'd leave my mom and me hanging without food for over 3 days. What a jerk. Oh, and I still have that plushie, by the way. It's in my closet. As for my bio dad, no contact at all. Story 22. I was at this engagement party when an older dude started sharing a wild story. He talked about how, back when he was working in a town that had just gone through some serious ethnic conflict, he and his work buddies found out a group of guys from one ethnic group were committing some really awful acts against little girls from another group. So, this guy and his crew figured the best way to handle it was to track down where these guys lived. One night, they took matters into their own hands and made sure those guys wouldn't hurt anyone else again. They left the bodies out in the open as a message to anyone thinking about doing something similar. He seemed totally okay with what they did, but he was pretty shaken up by the terrible stuff those other men were up to. He said something like, "Those guys had no business being alive." I'm not going to dive into more details about the location or time. The story came up because there was someone at the party who was from a nearby area. Story 23. So, one of my mom's buddies, this super chill little old dude, got me a gig at the cleaning company where he worked. I was 18, and it was easy cash. He was really talkative and nice, and during lunch, he started sharing how he couldn't hear well out of one ear. Then, out of nowhere, he casually mentions that he was tortured with electricity and got slapped in the ear back in his home country, a Latin American place under a military regime back then, until he passed out, and when he came to, he found himself in a mass grave. He figured they thought he was gone and just tossed him aside, but he woke up, crawled through the bodies, and somehow made it back home. This little old man survived stuff that's way worse than anything you can imagine. Like, the kind of stuff that would turn me into a total mess. Yet, he told death to take a hike and decided to live his best life instead. That totally changed my definition of tough. It's not about those big, muscular alpha guys. It's about the people who've stared down the worst and still choose to enjoy life because they know just how bad it can get. That took a serious turn real quick. Here I was expecting some wholesome story about a cute old man, and then, boom, torture? Like, whoa, dude. Can we not drop bombs like that over lunch? Definitely gives "my life is more interesting than yours" vibes, but in a deeply unsettling way. I hope he finds a way to share his story in a more positive light, because that's rough. Guess that cleaning service is way more than just dusting off some shelves. Story 24. My grandma tied the knot with a dude who's almost 20 years younger than her right after my sister and I came into the world. When we were around 2, our mom had to check into a mental health facility, so we ended up living with our grandma. A few months later, my sister started having some issues that my grandma thought was a UTI, but turns out she actually had gonorrhea. To make a long story short, there was an investigation, and my grandma's husband got arrested. Fast forward almost 20 years. Even though grandma divorced him, she still keeps in touch with his 2 sisters, the youngest being about 15 years younger than him. We were all hanging out for a 4th of July BBQ, and the sisters mentioned that their brother is now out of prison and staying at a place for offenders of SA. Then the older sister drops a major bomb. It didn't stop him last time, and it won't stop him this time. We all just stared at her in disbelief. What do you mean by last time? Apparently, right before marrying my grandma, he had just been released from a mental hospital for messing with his youngest sister. The whole family knew he had some serious issues, but kept it quiet because he was still technically a minor, 17, when it happened, and they thought maybe the hospital stay would fix him. But when he messed up again, they just decided not to mention any of this for nearly 2 decades while still hanging out with my family, who was totally crushed by what happened. Needless to say, we cut ties with them. Story 25. One time, a coworker just popped by my desk and casually mentioned that his uncle had done some really messed up stuff to him when he was little. Then he just bounced. I still can't shake it off, even after all these years. Story 26. So, an old buddy from the fandom shared this story about her stepmom, who she really couldn't stand. Turns out, her dad had issues with her too. One morning, the lady just up and vanished from their lives for good, and the only thing she took was the mattress. Story 27. My boss's husband casually mentioned that he hooked up with his aunt when he was 19. Like, he was bragging about how much action he was getting back in the day. Story 28. So, I, 50 Fahrenheit, let the maintenance guy into my condo to swap out my thermostat. I've seen him around before, and he's always been super chill and fast with the fixes. It was the beginning of summer, and he asked if my kids and I had any fun vacation plans. I threw the question back at him, and we were just chatting casually. Then out of nowhere, he drops this bomb, saying he offended his brother. Like, what the heck? I totally froze and just mumbled something as he was putting the faceplate back on. He didn't elaborate on that wild comment, and I didn't want to dig deeper. He quickly said goodbye and bounced. I ended up moving not long after that. That took a hard turn, huh? Like, you're just trying to vibe over thermostats and then this dude drops a murder confession? I mean, that's one way to end the small talk. All I'm saying is, if I had a dime for every time someone casually mentioned murder while I was trying to figure out my vacation plans, I'd still be broke, because that's just wild. Honestly, this guy needs to switch up his conversation starter game. Maybe stick to the weather or something less, I don't know, murderous? Story 29. So, I was chatting with this dude about a year after we graduated high school. His dad was a cop with the LA Metro. He was all chill and mentioned how he and his buddy would throw on suits, grab his dad's Crown Vic, badge, and gun, and bother some folks in Hollywood. He said bother, but I'm pretty sure he meant score some free favors. Fast forward to our 10-year reunion, the only one I actually went to, and he had turned into an LA Metro cop himself, but things weren't looking too hot. He was going through a divorce, on his 3rd police department, and facing lawsuits from 3 different people. He said they were going after the departments, but also him personally, and he didn't think he'd be in the cop game much longer. I didn't pry for the juicy details. He spilled all this in like 30 seconds, then hit me with, "So, what's new with you? Oh, and by the way, this guy used to hold our high school bench press record, 460 pounds. He would do all sorts of stuff and still manage to lift that weight for a single rep. Also, I heard from a friend that this dude had been playing cop since 11th grade. They would even mess with pimps and dealers, taking their stuff." Story 30. So, I had this buddy who kicked her crack habit a while back, and she once told me this wild story about a party. She said she kind of sold her friend to a couple of guys for some crack. The friend was way too out of it to even know what was happening, or give a thumbs up. The way she talked about it was super casual, like she was just joking around, and there was zero regret in her voice. I totally get that people do some crazy stuff when they're deep into addiction, but the lack of any guilt really hit me hard. After hearing that, I just couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Story 31. So, my little girl in kindergarten got invited to this pool party with her friends. While I was hanging out with some of the other moms, one of them opened up about feeling down because she had to say goodbye to her Great Dane since he was a bit too much to handle. In a totally chill way, she shared that the lady from the Great Dane Rescue didn't really take her word for it about the dog's behavior until, get this, the dog went and took a chunk out of her arm. Story 32. So, my coworker was just chilling and mentioned how he got kicked out of the army for some serious stuff involving a girl, along with another guy. We were just unloading boxes and chatting about past jobs and what we dreamed of doing as kids when he brought that up. Then he said that's why he's kinda anxious about getting into the police academy. And right after that, he casually asked what I was gonna have for lunch. Just a heads up, he's a cop now. Story 33. So my friend just casually mentioned that his kid isn't actually his. Turns out it's from his wife's dealer, but I guess they're cool with it now, so whatever. That's a plot twist I wasn't ready for on a Tuesday. Like, imagine casually finding out that your kid isn't actually your kid, but instead a product of your wife's questionable life choices. Real-life soap opera vibes right there. But hey, if they're all good now, I guess that's one way to handle family drama. Just roll with it like nothing ever happened. Honestly, just another day in the life of I can't believe this is real,